Have you ever watched a concert and completely forgot you were looking at global music titans, feeling like you just stumbled into a chaotic comedy movie instead? We all know their razor-sharp choreography, but what happens when the script is thrown out, adrenaline spikes, and the biggest boy band in the world decides the stage is just their personal playground? What kind of absolute madness unfolds when the rules disappear? Which member turned a simple dance break into a viral riot? Buckle up, because you won't believe these 7 times BTS threw professionalism out the window for pure fun.
Number 7. Jin, the Rose Bowl Water War. Complete chaos. Imagine standing in the colossal expanse of the Rose Bowl Stadium in Los Angeles, California, surrounded by over 60,000 screaming fans, the night air vibrating with the sheer bass of the speakers and the electric anticipation of a history-making concert, a moment where the pressure on any normal artist would be absolutely suffocating. Yet for BTS, it became the perfect backdrop for pure, unfiltered rebellion. It was the spring of 2019 during the monumental Love Yourself, Speak Yourself stadium tour, a tour that solidified their status not just as K-pop idols, but as global music legends who had conquered the West. And the expectations were astronomically high, with every camera flashing, every critic watching, and every single move choreographed to absolute perfection. But when the encore rolled around and the upbeat, rebellious anthem, So What, began to echo through the stadium, something shifted in the atmosphere, and the script was entirely ripped to shreds by none other than Jin, the eldest member of the group, a man often burdened with the responsibility of being the mature Hyung, but who secretly harbors the chaotic soul of a mischievous child. You see, in the tightly controlled world of Korean pop music, where idols are trained for years to maintain flawless composure, never miss a mark, and always present a polished image, breaking formation to mess around is practically a cardinal sin. But Jin looked at that massive, glittering stage, looked at the perfectly arranged water bottles near the monitors, and saw an opportunity that he simply could not resist. With a glint of pure deviousness in his eyes, a look that armies have come to know and fear, he casually strolled over to the edge of the stage, his sequined outfit catching the intense stadium lights, and grabbed a standard-issue plastic water bottle, not to hydrate after hours of grueling, breath-stealing choreography, but to arm himself for battle. The tension was palpable as he crept up behind Jimin, who was completely absorbed in hyping up the crowd, singing his heart out with that angelic voice, completely unaware of the impending doom sneaking up his blind side. And then, in a flash of unscripted brilliance, Jin launched the water, unleashing a massive, shimmering arc of liquid that caught the blinding spotlights before absolutely drenching an unsuspecting Jimin. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of laughter and shock, the sound shaking the very foundations of the stadium as Jimin whipped around, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face a perfect picture of utter betrayal mixed with sudden, fierce competitive fire. But Jin didn't stop there. Like a man possessed by the spirit of a chaotic playground menace, he sprinted across the massive stage, his long legs eating up the distance, dodging backup dancers and expensive pyrotechnic equipment, armed with yet another bottle, this time targeting the group's golden maknae, Jungkook, initiating a full-blown high-stakes water war that turned a multi-million-dollar stadium production into a neighborhood backyard brawl. It was a moment of sheer glorious insanity, a stark contrast to the emotionally heavy, tear-jerking performances of their solo tracks, because right here in front of the entire world, they weren't global superstars carrying the weight of an entire industry on their shoulders. They were just 20-something guys having the absolute time of their lives. Jungkook, never one to back down from a challenge, instantly retaliated, scooping up his own water bottle and chasing Jin across the extended stage, their laughter echoing through their live microphones, breathless and genuine, completely ignoring the fact that they were supposed to be delivering a synchronized pop performance. The sheer physics of the moment were cinematic, with water flying everywhere, splashing onto the expensive camera lenses, causing the broadcast screens to blur momentarily in a beautiful, messy haze, while the rest of the members either scrambled for cover or joyfully joined the fray, turning the sleek, high-tech stage into a slippery, unpredictable slip-and-slide. This wasn't just a funny blooper, it was a profound, deeply emotional reminder of why millions of people connect with BTS on such an intimate level, because beyond the records, the Billboard hits, and the flawless aesthetics, they possess a raw, authentic humanity that refuses to be suppressed by fame, a brotherhood that is so incredibly real you can literally see it in the way they play, fight, and laugh together without a single ounce of pretension. Jin's instigation of the Rose Bowl water war broke every conventional rule of stadium etiquette, challenging the very notion of what a perfect performance looks like, and proving that sometimes the most memorable, magical moments in live music aren't the ones that are rehearsed for months in a studio, but the ones born out of spontaneous, childish joy, leaving the audience breathless, smiling until their cheeks hurt, and wondering how on earth a group of international superstars could make a venue of 60,000 people feel as intimate, warm, and hilariously chaotic as a simple summer afternoon playing with the neighborhood kids. To truly understand the gravity of this moment, we have to delve deep into the psychological toll that constant perfection demands from artists at the absolute pinnacle of the entertainment industry, where a single misstep can become a viral controversy, and the pressure to maintain a godlike facade often strips away the very essence of human joy. Jin, whose real name is Kim Sok-jin, has often spoken about his philosophy of happiness, deliberately choosing to act as the mood maker of the group to ensure that the heavy crown of global fame doesn't crush the spirits of his younger brothers, using his own shamelessness as a protective shield for the group's mental well-being. And this water war was the ultimate manifestation of that profound, empathetic philosophy in action. When he launched that water bottle, he wasn't just soaking Jimin and Jungkook, he was washing away the immense, suffocating tension of the tour, forcefully injecting a massive dose of serotonin into a high-stakes environment, and giving his bandmates the tacit permission to let go, to forget the cameras, and just be regular guys in their 20s. The sensory details of that specific night make the memory even legendary. The cool Los Angeles breeze cutting through the stifling heat of the intense stadium lights, the smell of pyrotechnic smoke lingering in the air, the dazzling reflection of the army bombs, the official light sticks, creating a massive pulsating ocean of purple light that illuminated the falling water droplets like scattered diamonds frozen in mid-air. Fans in the front row later recounted how they could literally hear Jin's iconic windshield wiper laughter piercing through the massive wall of sound from the stadium speakers, a sound so infectious and pure that it instantly caused a ripple effect of uncontainable joy throughout the entire venue, proving that emotions are fiercely contagious. Furthermore, the chaotic aftermath of the water fight presented a genuine logistical nightmare for the stage crew, who were watching millions of dollars of sophisticated audio-visual equipment being subjected to an impromptu monsoon. Yet even the normally strict production managers couldn't help but smile, because the energy was simply too euphoric to interrupt. As the song So What reached its electrifying climax, the stage had been transformed into a literal hazard zone, slippery and wet, forcing the members to slide around in their heavy designer boots, turning their intricate choreography into an improvised, dangerous yet hilariously entertaining ice skating routine, where every step was a gamble between landing a cool pose or ending up flat on their backs.
Number 6. V. The Giant Bouncy Castle Rebellion. Pure gravity defiance.
Picture the monumental scale of the Love Yourself, Speak Yourself tour, an architectural marvel of a stage set designed to perfection, featuring a literal, massive, inflatable bouncy castle complete with a giant slide suddenly materializing right in the middle of a world-class stadium, a prop that was initially intended to add a colorful, playful aesthetic to their performance of Anpan Man, a song dedicated to the world's weakest hero who gives away pieces of his own head to feed the hungry. Now, most musical acts of this caliber might use such a prop as a static background piece, or carefully incorporate it into a highly structured, meticulously rehearsed routine to ensure no one gets hurt and the broadcast angles remain flawless. But Kim Tae-young, known to the world as V, possesses an artistic soul that actively rejects predictability, an eccentric, deeply emotive spirit that operates on an entirely different frequency than the rest of the music industry. As the bouncy, infectious synth intro of Anpan Man blasted through the mammoth speaker towers, echoing against the concrete walls of the stadium and whipping the crowd of tens of thousands into an absolute frenzy of waving purple light sticks, V took one look at that colossal, brightly colored inflatable structure and completely abandoned whatever loose choreography the creative directors had mapped out for him. Instead of merely posing by the slide, he regressed into a state of pure, unadulterated, childlike wonder. His deep, soulful baritone voice, a voice that had just moments before seduced the entire arena with the haunting, theatrical darkness of his solo track Singularity, now punctuated by breathless giggles as he hurled his body up the slippery plastic incline with the desperate enthusiasm of a 5-year-old at a birthday party. It was a staggering visual juxtaposition that encapsulated the sheer genius of BTS. Here was a man globally recognized as a fashion icon, frequently dubbed the most handsome face on the planet, draped in expensive designer streetwear, completely tossing his carefully cultivated idol image into the wind to furiously scramble up a bouncy castle, losing his footing, sliding backward, and eventually belly flopping onto the inflated surface in a tangle of limbs and microphone wires. The fans didn't just scream, they shrieked in collective, endearing disbelief as V turned the multi-million-dollar stage into his own personal jungle gym, completely ignoring his designated camera marks to bounce so high he practically defied gravity, his iconic rectangular boxy smile stretching from ear to ear, radiating a joy so potent and infectious it could be felt all the way in the nosebleed section. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of distraction, it was a sustained, deliberate rebellion against the suffocating rigidity of global superstardom, a powerful statement that despite the grueling schedules, the sleepless nights, the intense media scrutiny, and the crushing weight of carrying South Korea's cultural economy on their backs, they refused to let the industry steal their youth. To understand the emotional resonance of this playground moment, you have to look at the psychological landscape of Kim Tae-young, an artist who has frequently spoken about his internal battles with the pressure of fame, his desire to remain a free spirit, and his constant effort to find the delicate balance between the polished persona of V and the ordinary farm boy at heart reality of Tae-young. By attacking that inflatable slide with such shameless, chaotic vigor, he was effectively taking a sledgehammer to the invisible wall that separates untouchable celebrities from their audience, inviting the army to share in a moment of raw, unfiltered vulnerability, where perfection was traded for the simple, universal thrill of a playground romp. The sheer physics of the situation were a recipe for a broadcast disaster, with V literally tumbling head over heels down the slide, momentarily disappearing from the giant LED screens, only to pop back up at the bottom, his hair a disheveled, sweaty mess, completely missing his musical cue because he was laughing too hard, forcing his bandmates, particularly RM and J-Hope, to scramble and cover his lines while simultaneously trying to suppress their own
own contagious laughter at the sight of their usually suave bandmate acting like a hyperactive toddler. The air was thick with the scent of adrenaline and the sweet, nostalgic smell of heated plastic from the inflatables, while the deafening roar of the stadium created a cacophony of sound that perfectly matched the visual chaos unfolding on stage. Every time he launched himself into the air, landing with a heavy, squeaking thud against the inflated vinyl, he was unknowingly delivering a masterclass in authentic audience connection, proving that the most profound moments in a live concert aren't born from flawless execution, but from the magnetic, humanizing power of spontaneous joy. Fans and critics alike often analyze BTS's success through the lens of their intricate universe, their socially conscious lyrics, and their knife-point dancing, but this specific incident illuminates a crucial, often overlooked ingredient in their recipe for world domination: their unshakable brotherhood and their shared, unspoken agreement to protect their inner child at all costs. As V continued his relentless assault on the bouncy castle, eventually dragging a surprisingly willing Jimin into the fray for a mid-song wrestling match on the bouncy floor, the underlying message of Anpan Man was brought to life in the most beautifully ironic way imaginable. They were performing a song about a flawed, unconventional superhero who gives his all to make others smile, and right there, by sacrificing his cool image, his breath control, and his dignity to act like an absolute goofball on a giant inflatable toy, V became that exact hero for millions of people watching, delivering a massive, healing dose of serotonin that no perfectly choreographed dance break could ever match. This glorious, messy, gravity-defying playground rebellion remains deeply etched in the fandom's collective memory, a towering testament to the fact that BTS might possess the talent, wealth, and influence of untouchable gods. They possess the hearts of ordinary boys who just want to have fun. It was a fleeting, spectacular reminder that behind the breathtaking production values and the record-breaking statistics, there beats a beautifully human heart, wild and free, refusing to be caged by the expectations of the world, and wildly bouncing to the rhythm of its own eccentric, joyous drum. So, when the world tries to tell you that growing up means losing your sense of play, just look back at the night Kim Tae-young saw a plastic castle and decided to conquer it not as a global pop monarch, but as a boy desperately, wonderfully in love with the simple thrill of the slide. But if you thought a bouncy castle was the peak of stadium rebellion, just wait until you hear what happens when the group's most intimidating, fiercely intense rapper decides to completely break character. What occurs when the stage is stripped of its props, leaving only raw emotion and an unexpected, mind-boggling display of pure chaotic energy from the last person you'd ever expect? Prepare yourselves, because the next entry on our list shatters every single stereotype you thought you knew about this global phenomenon.
Number 5. Suga, the Great Stadium Tag Match, a savage rapper's soft rebellion. When you think of Min Yoongi, globally recognized as Suga, or his formidable, intensely aggressive alter ego August D, the immediate image that flashes into your mind is likely one of fierce, uncompromising intensity, a prodigious producer and underground rapper hailing from Daegu, who spits absolute fire with his infamous rapid-fire tongue technology. A deeply introspective artist who has openly and bravely chronicled his grueling battles with societal pressures, the burdens of extreme fame, and the suffocating expectations of the idol industry through his deeply raw, unapologetically heavy hip-hop tracks. For years, he was widely considered the self-proclaimed rock of the group, often perceived by casual onlookers as the quiet, lethargic, highly observant introvert who would much rather be locked inside his studio, affectionately and aptly named the Genius Lab, surrounded by expensive MIDI keyboards, synthesizers, and half-empty iced Americanos, than partaking in the loud, chaotic, energy-draining physical comedy that his younger bandmates practically thrived on. He naturally carried an aura of stoic intimidation, an unspoken boundary that demanded a deep, reverent respect from both his musical peers and the massive global fandom, making him the absolute last person on planet Earth you would ever expect to completely lose his mind and abandon his cool exterior on a massive stadium stage. But fast forward to the monumental, emotionally charged atmosphere of the Permission to Dance on Stage concerts in Los Angeles, a highly anticipated, tear-jerking reunion with their beloved ARMY after a grueling, soul-crushing 2-year pandemic drought that had left the entire world and the band themselves feeling incredibly isolated and stagnant. The atmosphere inside the colossal SoFi Stadium was electric, the thumping, high-energy bass line of their encore tracks beginning to violently vibrate through the concrete floors, the air thick with the suffocating heat of 70,000 bodies, the salty sting of sweat, and the metallic, celebratory scent of freshly blasted paper confetti raining down like artificial snow. And suddenly, in a split second, the invisible script completely shattered. Out of nowhere, dispensing with every single ounce of his carefully cultivated, effortlessly cool hip-hop persona, Yoongi's face cracked into a blinding, utterly radiant, gummy smile, a smile so pure, wide, and unguarded that it instantly caused a collective, deafening meltdown among millions of fans. And he simply took off. He didn't just walk, and he didn't just casually jog to the extended stage. He initiated a full-blown, high-speed, chaotic game of tag, sprinting across the massive runway with an explosive burst of adrenaline-fueled energy that left absolutely everyone, including his own highly chaotic bandmates, staring in absolute jaw-dropping disbelief. It was a sight so startling and wildly out of character that for a terrifying split second, the highly trained, incredibly tense stadium security guards actually panicked, their hands instinctively flying to their earpieces as this dark-haired blur of a man darted past the heavy monitor speakers, genuinely mistaking his sudden aggressive sprint for a crazed fan who had somehow breached the barricades, only to realize a heartbeat later that it was just a multi-millionaire Grammy-nominated artist acting exactly like an overly caffeinated elementary schooler on a massive sugar high. He zeroed in on Jimin and Jungkook, his legs pumping furiously, his customized, oversized concert t-shirt flapping wildly in the warm California wind, expertly dodging incredibly expensive, heavy camera rigs, tangled wires, and pyrotechnic vents with a reckless, joyous abandon, laughing so incredibly hard into his sleek black microphone that the sound morphed into a series of breathless, delighted wheezes echoing out across the massive stadium speaker towers. The sheer emotional gravity of this wildly chaotic playground moment cannot possibly be overstated, especially when you factor in the agonizing physical and mental journey Yoongi had endured just a year prior to this explosive sprint. For years, unbeknownst to the general public, he had been performing flawless, bone-breaking choreography in silent, agonizing pain, hiding a severe, debilitating shoulder injury sustained from a tragic motorcycle delivery accident during his harsh pre-debut days when he was struggling just to afford a single bowl of noodles, an injury that eventually required intense, highly invasive surgery that left him physically grounded, isolated in a sling, and terrified that he might never be able to properly perform on stage with his brothers again. So to see him now, under the blinding, kaleidoscopic stadium laser lights, his freshly healed shoulder moving freely, absolutely sprinting across the stage without a single wince or grimace of pain, his eyes crinkling into beautiful crescent moons of pure, unadulterated euphoria, it wasn't just a funny concert blooper to laugh at on Twitter. It was a deeply profound, tear-jerking victory lap that carried the weight of a decade of silent suffering finally coming to an end. It was the physical manifestation of a man who had finally, truly conquered his darkest physical demons, shedding the heavy protective armor of his intimidating August D persona to just exist in the fleeting, beautiful moment, breathing in the overwhelming, deafening love of the crowd and reflecting it back tenfold through sheer, unfiltered playfulness. The visual contrast on stage was a masterclass in human duality. This was the exact same man who had just minutes prior commanded the entire arena with a fiercely aggressive, breathtakingly intense rap verse, demanding absolute silence and respect with a single glare, who was now giggling uncontrollably as he desperately tried to outmaneuver a deeply confused but highly competitive Jungkook, nearly slipping on a rogue patch of slippery confetti in the chaotic process, while RM and J-Hope doubled over in supportive laughter at the incredibly rare sight. This glorious, unscripted, high-speed game of tag completely obliterated the toxic industry-standard expectation that a serious, respected hip-hop artist must always maintain a detached, untouchable aura of coolness to be taken seriously by the masses. Yoongi proved that true artistic maturity doesn't mean killing your inner child to appear professional. Rather, it means finally feeling safe enough, loved enough, and free enough within your own skin to let that inner child out to play in front of 70,000 screaming people without a single ounce of shame or hesitation. Fans in the front row vividly remember the sheer velocity of his run, the sweat flying off his brow and catching the purple laser lights like tiny chaotic fireflies, and the way the entire stadium's energy completely shifted from awestruck admiration to a warm, fiercely protective affection that resonated deep within the chest. It was a stark, beautiful reminder of the deeply human core that drives the biggest band in the world, a group of men who, despite the astronomical, mind-bending heights of their global fame and the crushing expectations placed upon their shoulders, still find the most profound healing joy in simply chasing each other around a stage, turning a tightly scheduled, heavily monitored, multi-million-dollar production into a literal breathless playground. As he finally slowed at the very edge of the stage, completely out of breath, clutching his chest and leaning heavily on the barricade, while still sporting that dangerously bright, infectious, gummy smile, he cemented one of the most legendary, emotionally resonant moments in BTS history, leaving the audience entirely captivated, deeply moved, and forever changed by the sight of his newfound freedom. But if you thought Yoongi's unexpected athletic outburst was a wild deviation from the script, just wait until we dive into the absolute madness of our next mind-blowing moment.
Number 4. J-Hope, the inflatable tube man, complete emotional whiplash. When you look at Jungkook, universally known and adored by millions as J-Hope, you are fundamentally looking at a man who embodies the absolute pinnacle of physical discipline, an incredibly meticulous, fiercely observant artist who holds the heavy, deeply respected title of dance captain for the most synchronized, choreographically demanding musical act on the face of the planet. Behind the scenes, in the grueling, sweat-drenched confines of the HYBE practice rooms, he is known to possess a terrifyingly sharp eye for detail, a strict perfectionist who can instantly spot a single toe out of line or a finger bent at the wrong angle, demanding excellence from his bandmates with a commanding presence that even the group's formidable leader respects with a healthy dose of fear. He is a former underground street dancer who goes by the legendary moniker Smile Hoya, a man whose very bone structure seems to be hardwired for rhythm, capable of executing world-class popping, locking, and hip-hop isolations with a devastatingly cool, effortless swagger that leaves professional dancers completely awestruck. Because of this heavily cultivated reputation as the undisputed king of the stage, the absolute last thing you would ever expect him to do during a highly emotional, deeply poignant stadium concert encore is to completely abandon his God-given skeletal structure and aggressively transform himself into a chaotic, wildly flailing physical comedy act. Yet that is exactly the glorious, mind-bending madness that unfolded during the emotional climax of the Love Yourself tour, a moment specifically reserved for tear-jerking farewells, heavy reflections, and the deeply moving ballad Make It Right, a song that traditionally has the members walking slowly around the extended stadium stages, making profound, deeply emotional eye contact with their crying fans, while the night sky is beautifully illuminated by a massive, pulsing ocean of purple army bombs. The atmospheric pressure of a BTS encore is notoriously heavy, often serving as a massive emotional release valve for both the band and the fans after a grueling 3-hour marathon of intense high-energy performances. And on this particular night, the tears were already beginning to well up in the eyes of the younger members, the collective weight of their astronomical journey and their overwhelming gratitude hanging thick in the cool night air. But J-Hope, ever the brilliant emotional barometer of the group, recognized that the air was getting just a little too heavy, the melancholy threatening to overshadow the pure, celebratory joy of their achievement, and in a split-second decision that completely defied his own immaculate coolness, he decided to completely shatter the solemn atmosphere with a masterclass in unhinged bodily chaos. Completely unprompted and completely ignoring the soft, gentle acoustic melody echoing out of the massive speaker towers, J-Hope suddenly went completely boneless, dropping his shoulders, letting his jaw go slack, and violently imitating a wacky, waving, inflatable arm-flailing man right in front of a multi-million-dollar high-definition broadcasting camera. He threw his limbs in every conceivable direction with a terrifying rubbery elasticity, his highly expensive designer jacket slipping off his shoulders as his arms violently whipped through the air in a totally unpredictable, hilariously erratic rhythm that had absolutely zero connection to the beat of the song. The sheer physical comedy of the moment was instantly magnified by his facial expression. While his body was flopping around like a deeply distressed jellyfish caught in a high-speed hurricane, his face was locked into an incredibly intense, deadpan stare of absolute, unwavering commitment, looking directly into the camera lens as if he were delivering the most serious, heart-wrenching performance of his entire illustrious career. The visual whiplash was so extraordinarily severe that Jimin, who had been softly serenading the crowd with his angelic, honey-sweet vocals just 3 feet away, physically collapsed onto the hard stage floor, his microphone completely dropping from his hands as he doubled over, his body shaking with completely silent, breathless laughter, utterly unable to continue his designated lines. The massive stadium screens immediately broadcasted J-Hope's chaotic, floppy rebellion to 60,000 deeply confused and suddenly hysterical fans. The initial wave of emotional, concert-ending tears instantly evaporated into a roaring, deafening tidal wave of pure, uncontrollable laughter that shook the very foundation of the massive concrete venue. Jungkook, desperately trying to maintain his professionalism and finish his vocal run, physically had to turn his entire body away from J-Hope, aggressively squeezing his eyes shut to avoid looking at his older brother, his broad shoulders trembling as a deeply uncool, high-pitched giggle aggressively forced its way through his live microphone, entirely ruining the soft acoustic vibe of the track. This completely unhinged playground moment wasn't just a random act of stage silliness, it was a deeply profound, incredibly moving display of exactly why J-Hope is widely considered the beating heart and the central emotional pillar of BTS.
While the world sees him as a flawlessly cool, incredibly wealthy global superstar and an intimidating dance maestro, his brothers know him as the ultimate sacrificial mood maker, a man who is more than willing to completely destroy his own carefully crafted image of perfection, to look absolutely ridiculous in front of millions of people if it means he can protect his bandmates from sinking too deep into the overwhelming, crushing emotional pressure of their reality. By turning a tear-jerking, heavily sentimental stadium finale into a completely absurd, violently floppy physical comedy sketch, he forcefully injected a massive, healing dose of adrenaline and serotonin directly into the veins of the concert, pulling Jimin up from the floor by his shirt collar while still wildly flailing his free arm, creating an unforgettable, deeply human tableau of brotherhood that no amount of intense choreography training could ever replicate. He single-handedly transformed the untouchable, highly serious pedestal of global stardom into an intimate, wildly chaotic living room filled with exhausted, deliriously happy 20-somethings just trying to make each other laugh, proving that true artistry isn't just about hitting perfect angles, but about fundamentally knowing exactly when to let the angles completely fall apart. The fans who witnessed this live often talk about the visceral, almost healing energy of that specific moment, the way the cool stadium breeze caught his wildly flying hair, the blinding flash of the stage lights reflecting off his oversized, goofy smile that eventually broke through his deadpan facade, and the sheer comforting realization that even at the absolute peak of the music industry, BTS refuses to take themselves too seriously. He gave the entire arena permission to stop crying and start smiling, turning a goodbye into a wild, unforgettable celebration of life, and securing his legacy not just as a world-class dancer, but as a fearless, wildly chaotic protector of joy. But if you thought J-Hope's floppy, boneless rebellion was the absolute peak of uncontrollable stage chaos, you were profoundly mistaken. Because what exactly happens when the brilliant, deeply philosophical, and heavily burdened leader of the group completely forgets his own superhuman strength and accidentally turns a high-budget stage prop into a shattered pile of debris? Who is the towering, heavily muscled genius that tried to look incredibly cool and intensely aggressive during a fierce hip-hop set, only to violently dismantle his own equipment and leave the entire production crew in an absolute terrified panic while his bandmates tried to hide their smiles? You absolutely will not believe the sheer, unintentional destructive power of our next unforgettable playground moment.
Number 3. RM, the God of Destruction, strikes. A hilarious display of accidental power. When you deeply examine the phenomenal, entirely unprecedented global ascent of BTS, navigating through their record-breaking album sales, their sold-out stadium tours, and their massive cultural impact, it is absolutely impossible to ignore the towering, foundational, and deeply grounding presence of Kim Namjoon, globally revered as RM, the brilliant, fiercely philosophical, and linguistically gifted leader who quite literally carried the initial crushing weight of the group's massive ambitions squarely on his broad, heavily muscled shoulders. He is a man armed with a staggering genius-level IQ of 148, an intensely thoughtful, deeply introspective lyricist who casually and beautifully weaves complex Jungian psychology, ancient Greek mythology, and profound existential philosophy into his chart-topping, aggressive rap verses. A highly respected, deeply articulate global ambassador who stood before the United Nations General Assembly and delivered a breathtakingly eloquent, profoundly moving speech about self-love and identity that resonated with millions of youth across the entire planet.
On stage, especially during their fiercely aggressive, bass-heavy hip-hop sets, he meticulously cultivates an aura of untouchable, commanding dominance, expertly using his tall, imposing physical stature and his incredibly deep, gravelly baritone voice to absolute perfection, staring down the massive high-definition broadcast camera lenses with a piercing, dragon-like gaze that demands absolute respect and subdues entire screaming arenas into a state of awestruck, silent submission. However, underneath this incredibly intimidating, hyper-competent, and heavily burdened leadership persona lies a wildly endearing, deeply hilarious, and heavily documented fatal flaw that has affectionately earned him the legendary, highly feared moniker, the God of Destruction, among both his exasperated bandmates and the global fandom. He possesses the sheer, undeniable physical strength of a heavily mutated comic book superhero, perfectly combined with the spatial awareness and delicate touch of a hyperactive, incredibly clumsy golden retriever puppy who has absolutely no idea how big he actually is. The absolute, undeniable peak of this chaotic, uncontrollable duality spectacularly collided during a highly anticipated, adrenaline-pumping live stadium performance, where the group was deeply immersed in delivering a fiercely aggressive, flawlessly synchronized, and highly intense hip-hop routine that heavily involved customized, incredibly expensive stage props, specifically designed to make the 7 members look like gritty, untouchable underground kings dominating an urban wasteland. The atmospheric pressure in the massive venue was incredibly thick with palpable tension, the massive extended stage bathed in aggressive pulsing red and blinding white laser lights, the deafening, earth-shattering roar of the massive crowd violently vibrating through the heavy concrete floors, and the heavy thumping bass line physically shaking the very rib cages of the 60,000 people in attendance as RM confidently stepped forward to center stage to deliver his fiercely anticipated rapid-fire rap verse. The meticulous choreography dictated that he aggressively grab and forcefully tilt a heavy, highly expensive, custom-welded metal microphone stand, a theatrical move specifically designed by their performance directors to exude maximum swagger, effortless coolness, and raw, masculine aggression that perfectly matched the gritty tone of the music. But in a fleeting, terrifying moment of pure, unfiltered, adrenaline-fueled excitement, Namjoon completely forgot his own terrifying, superhuman strength, tightly gripping the thick metal rod and violently yanking it toward his body with such a massive, uncontrollable surge of sheer physical force that the incredibly expensive, custom-made equipment didn't just bend out of shape, it violently, dramatically, and audibly snapped completely in half, with a sharp, echoing crack that somehow managed to pierce right through the deafening wall of sound erupting from the stadium speakers. The immediate, terrifying aftermath was a cinematic masterpiece of pure, unadulterated comedic whiplash, as the intensely cool, fierce, and untouchable hip-hop god instantly vanished into thin air, immediately replaced by a deeply panicked, highly intelligent 20-something man staring down at a jagged, broken piece of expensive metal in his massive hand with a look of absolute, soul-crushing terror and profound, deeply relatable confusion. The multi-million-dollar production crew, stationed in the dark, hidden wings of the massive stage, immediately entered a state of absolute terrified panic, their highly trained stage managers throwing their hands up in the air and frantically scrambling through their headsets as they desperately tried to figure out how to safely retrieve the jagged, highly dangerous debris before one of the other fiercely dancing members accidentally impaled themselves during the intricate, fast-paced choreography. But the true, absolute magic of this wild, rule-breaking playground moment lay in the immediate, wildly chaotic reactions of his deeply unprofessional, highly observant bandmates, who possess a supernatural, highly attuned sixth sense for instantly detecting any moment of weakness or clumsiness from their heavily respected leader. Jin, the eldest, physically had to bite down aggressively on his own bottom lip, his incredibly broad shoulders violently shaking as he desperately tried to maintain his fierce, brooding stage expression. While Jimin, who was stationed just a few feet away, let out a dangerously high-pitched, incredibly uncool squeak of stifled laughter, completely losing his tightly held core engagement and nearly stumbling over his own incredibly expensive designer combat boots in the middle of a complex dance move. Jungkook, witnessing his deeply admired role model accidentally destroy company property in real time, completely broke character, a massive, uncontrollable bunny-like grin spreading across his face as he watched RM desperately try to figure out what to do with the severed metal rod. RM, quickly realizing that he was completely stranded in the dead center of a massive stadium stage with half a broken microphone stand, an absolutely terrified production crew, and millions of fans watching live on giant screens, made the absolutely hilarious, heavily panicked executive decision to simply pretend that absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had happened at all. He aggressively tried to casually shove the broken, jagged piece of metal into his jacket, a wildly impractical, physically impossible, and completely absurd solution that only made him look even more intensely guilty and absolutely ridiculous, turning his incredibly fierce, intimidating rap verse into a desperate, wildly flailing attempt to quietly hide the physical evidence of his own uncontrollable, highly destructive power, while still trying to look like the coolest man on the planet. This specific, highly chaotic incident is so incredibly vital to the deeply emotional lore of BTS because it profoundly shatters the toxic, heavily manufactured illusion of absolute, unwavering perfection that the grueling, punishing, and highly critical K-pop industry constantly demands from its top-tier idols. It served as a massive, deeply comforting, and fiercely humanizing reminder that despite his staggering genius intellect, his immense global wealth, his monumental UN speeches, and his flawlessly produced chart-topping discography, Kim Namjoon is fundamentally still just a regular, deeply flawed, and hilariously clumsy guy who accidentally breaks expensive things when he gets a little too excited about doing his job. Number 2. Jimin, the angelic swan's vicious flying kick, a beautifully lethal revenge. When you gaze upon Park Jimin, universally adored and globally celebrated by millions as the breathtakingly ethereal, beautifully delicate fairy of BTS, you are essentially looking at a man who has completely mastered the profound, highly intricate art of human movement, a generational talent who famously entered the fiercely competitive Busan High School of Arts as the absolute top student in the incredibly demanding modern dance department. On stage, he is widely known for possessing a terrifyingly mesmerizing, almost otherworldly aura, commanding the massive stadium platforms with a liquid, breathtaking fluidity that completely defies the basic laws of human anatomy, effortlessly transitioning from the sharp, bone-breaking isolations of hip-hop to the deeply emotional, tragically beautiful extensions of contemporary ballet, all while delivering impossibly high, honey-sweet vocal runs that sound like they were pulled directly from the heavens. He is meticulously styled in heavily embellished, custom-fitted designer clothing, his hair often dyed in soft pastel colors, his eyes lined with dramatic, glittering makeup that perfectly accentuates his famously soft, mochi-like cheeks, creating an overall image of untouchable, pristine royalty that demands absolute reverent silence from anyone lucky enough to witness his solo performances of masterpieces like Serendipity or Black Swan. Because he is so intensely dedicated to this beautifully crafted, highly disciplined angelic persona, the absolute last thing you would ever anticipate seeing during a massive multi-million-dollar stadium production is this exact same delicate, soft-spoken prince suddenly snapping, completely abandoning his flawless posture and aggressively transforming into a highly lethal, ridiculously fast, and intensely vengeful martial arts action star right in the middle of a deeply emotional song. But to truly understand the sheer absolute madness that unfolded during the chaotic encore stages of the Love Yourself Stadium tour, you have to remember one incredibly crucial, highly terrifying fact that casual onlookers often completely forget. Before he was a globally famous contemporary dancer, Park Jimin was a fiercely tough, highly competitive boy from the rough-and-tumble port city of Busan who holds a deeply respected, highly dangerous black belt in Taekwondo and underwent years of intense, grueling training in Kendo. This deeply buried, fiercely combative Busan spirit spectacularly erupted on stage when his highly chaotic bandmates, knowing exactly how to push his meticulously polished buttons, decided to aggressively target him during a massive stadium-wide water fight, completely drenching his incredibly expensive, carefully styled outfit and absolutely ruining his flawless makeup in a matter of seconds. For a fleeting, highly tense microsecond, Jimin just stood there, dripping wet in the center of the colossal stadium stage, his head bowed, the deafening roar of 60,000 screaming fans suddenly fading into the background as he slowly ran a hand through his completely ruined water-soaked hair. And then the invisible switch violently flipped. The angelic, beautifully graceful swan was instantly, violently, entirely eradicated, instantly replaced by a highly trained, deeply competitive martial artist out for absolute, unapologetic blood. As Jimin abruptly locked eyes with his giggling attackers and took off across the massive extended runway with a terrifying, explosive burst of athletic speed that left the heavily trained security personnel completely stunned in their tracks. The visual whiplash was an absolute cinematic masterpiece of physical comedy. Here was a man dressed like a delicate, glittering prince suddenly aggressively sprinting past heavy pyrotechnic vents and massive speaker towers, his face twisted into a fierce, highly intimidating scowl that was absolutely betrayed by the desperately suppressed, breathless giggling violently echoing out of his live microphone. He fiercely zeroed in on his target, completely ignoring the complex choreography and his designated vocal cues, and right as the heavy thumping bass line of the encore track hit its absolute peak, Jimin launched himself entirely into the air, perfectly executing a flawless, spectacularly high and beautifully terrifying flying martial arts kick that narrowly missed his panicked bandmate by mere inches, landing gracefully on the slippery, water-soaked stage floor with the terrifying, unbothered precision of a lethal ninja. The entire stadium absolutely erupted into a state of deafening, hysterical chaos. The millions of fans watching live on the massive high-definition broadcast screens violently shrieking in absolute jaw-dropping disbelief as they witnessed the group's softest, most delicate member casually dropping a highly advanced combat move just to settle a petty playground water dispute. The sheer physics of the moment were entirely mind-boggling, his incredibly expensive, custom-made combat boots slicing through the cool, damp night air with terrifying speed, while Jin and Jungkook physically scrambled for absolute cover behind the heavy stage monitors, their faces a hilarious mixture of genuine, deeply rooted fear and absolute uncontrollable joy at the sight of their normally poised brother completely losing his mind. But this wildly unhinged, beautifully violent playground rebellion wasn't just a randomly hilarious concert blooper, it was a deeply profound, incredibly moving testament to the absolute, unshakable emotional safety and the fiercely tight-knit brotherhood that serves as the bedrock of BTS's unprecedented global dominance. For years, Jimin has bravely and openly struggled with crushing, suffocating perfectionism, enduring incredibly severe, highly dangerous diets and agonizingly brutal self-criticism in his desperate, highly emotional pursuit of becoming the flawless, untouchable idol that the deeply critical K-pop industry aggressively demands. So to see him in front of 70,000 people, his hair a completely ruined, soggy mess, his expensive clothes sticking aggressively to his skin, completely abandoning his intense need for perfection to gleefully fiercely chase his brothers across a slippery stage with flying kicks and breathless laughter, it was a massive, incredibly powerful visual declaration of his own hard-won emotional freedom and profound self-love. He proved in that beautifully chaotic, wildly unpredictable moment that true, lasting artistry doesn't mean maintaining a rigid, highly stressful facade of absolute perfection, but rather finding the beautiful, deeply human courage to completely let go, to embrace the wildly unscripted messiness of life, and to feel entirely, unconditionally safe enough to act like a completely ridiculous, fiercely vengeful child in front of the entire watching world. The massive production crew could do absolutely nothing but watch in a state of terrified, exasperated amusement as their beautifully choreographed, deeply poignant finale transformed into a literal high-speed martial arts dojo, firmly cementing Jimin's absolute legacy not just as a mesmerizing, world-class dancer, but as a fiercely unpredictable, completely hilarious force of nature who effortlessly proves that even the most beautiful swans possess a terrifyingly sharp, wildly entertaining bite. But if you thought Jimin's unexpected high-flying martial arts rampage was the absolute undeniable zenith of unscripted stadium chaos, you are deeply and profoundly mistaken, because what exactly happens when the youngest, the strongest, and the most fiercely talented member of the entire group completely short-circuits, turning his deeply respected, highly intimidating physical power into a wildly uncontrollable viral display of sheer, unadulterated madness? Who is the heavily tattooed, deeply competitive prodigy that looked at a massive... Number 1. Jungkook, the unstoppable Golden Machne's boundless sprint, absolute stadium domination. When you look at the towering, fiercely intimidating, and universally worshipped figure of Jungkook today, it is almost entirely impossible to reconcile his current, staggering, heavily muscular physical presence with the incredibly shy, wide-eyed 15-year-old boy who first debuted in the harsh, relentlessly demanding K-pop industry over a decade ago. He is globally recognized as the absolute, undisputed Golden Machne of BTS, a terrifyingly prodigious once-in-a-generation polymath who can sing with the breathtaking, honeyed vocal agility of a pop legend, execute bone-shattering center-stage choreography with devastating precision, and dominate international charts as a solo powerhouse, all while sporting a massive, deeply personal sleeve of dark, heavy tattoos and edgy facial piercings that perfectly cultivate an aura of untouchable, gritty, and fiercely mature rock star rebellion. On paper, and in the heavily stylized multi-million-dollar music videos, he projects an image of brooding, dangerous perfection, a highly disciplined, boxing-obsessed athlete whose physical strength is so highly documented and feared that even his older bandmates often jokingly admit they are terrified of accidentally provoking him. Because of this incredibly intense, highly polished global image, the absolute last thing you would ever expect from him at the absolute grueling climax of a massive 3-hour stadium concert when ordinary human beings would be completely, entirely physically destroyed is for him to suddenly, violently regress into a deeply chaotic, uncontrollably hyperactive toddler whose internal battery has just somehow shorted-circuited into overdrive. Yet that is exactly the mind-boggling, wildly unhinged reality that spectacularly unfolded during the monumental, emotionally explosive Permission to Dance on-stage residency at the colossal Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, a night that firmly cemented his legacy not just as a global pop titan, but as a wildly uncontrollable, fiercely beloved menace of the stage. The atmospheric pressure inside the massive enclosed venue was incredibly thick, suffocatingly hot, and vibrating with the exhausted, euphoric energy of 65,000 screaming fans. The older members of the group heavily leaning on each other, clutching water bottles, their chests heaving as they desperately tried to catch their breath after delivering yet another flawlessly synchronized, bone-breaking dance break. But Jungkook,
utterly defying every known law of human biology and physical fatigue, looked out at the massive, sprawling, extended stage perimeter and saw absolutely nothing but a giant, brightly lit, multi-million-dollar track and field playground completely devoid of any parental supervision. Right in the middle of a deeply emotional encore track, without a single warning or ounce of hesitation, the invisible switch violently flipped and Jungkook simply took off, launching his heavily muscled frame across the massive stadium floor with a terrifying, explosive burst of absolute Olympian-level speed that completely shattered the deeply sentimental atmosphere of the concert. He wasn't just lightly jogging to interact with the fans, he was aggressively, furiously sprinting at maximum velocity, his heavy combat boots slamming against the hard stage, his dark hair flying wildly in every direction as he expertly, violently dodged incredibly expensive camera equipment, massive speaker towers, and highly trained security guards who were entirely, desperately struggling to keep up with his completely unhinged pace. The visual whiplash was an absolute, breathtaking cinematic masterpiece of pure physical comedy. Here was the group's most intimidating, heavily tattooed member, dressed in a custom, fiercely edgy outfit, running laps around the stadium with the massive, incredibly uncool and deeply endearing boba eyeball grin of a child who had just consumed an entire pound of pure sugar, leaving a literal trail of absolute, breathless chaos in his wake. The multi-million-dollar broadcasting cameras, operated by seasoned industry veterans, literally failed to track his erratic, high-speed movements, while the massive stadium screens frequently just displaying a chaotic, blurry streak of denim, sweat, and ink, while the deafening roar of the Las Vegas crowd shifted from emotional, tearful cheering to absolute, hysterical, ear-piercing shrieks of laughter and disbelief. But his wild, rule-breaking playground rebellion didn't just stop at a high-speed sprint. Completely high on the intoxicating, deafening adrenaline of the roaring crowd, Jungkook suddenly dropped down right in the middle of the stage and started aggressively doing a series of rapid-fire, perfect-form push-ups, casually turning a massively expensive pop concert into his own personal, highly chaotic gym session, completely ignoring the fact that he was supposed to be singing his designated vocal lines. When he finally popped back up to his feet, barely breaking a sweat, his chaotic energy violently shifted targets to his deeply exhausted, highly unprepared older brothers, initiating a completely unhinged, fiercely physical game of tag, where he actively, aggressively hunted down a deeply panicked Jin and a totally exasperated Jimin, physically scooping them up into the air with terrifying, effortless ease despite their desperate, highly vocal protests heavily echoing through their live microphones. Namjoon and Yoongi, the group's highly respected, heavily philosophical rap line, could do absolutely nothing but stand completely still in the center of the stage, leaning heavily on their microphone stands, their faces a completely hilarious, deeply relatable mixture of immense pride, profound exhaustion, and absolute, terrified resignation as they watched their youngest member completely dismantle the professional structure of their highly curated show. But this wildly chaotic, beautifully unhinged moment of absolute physical dominance carries a deeply profound, incredibly heavy emotional weight that is absolutely crucial to understanding the profound magic of BTS and the deeply complex psychology of Jungkook. You have to remember that this is a young man who entirely surrendered his normal adolescence, who moved hundreds of miles away from his family in Busan before he even entered high school, completely sacrificing normal school trips, teenage rebellions, and careless playground days to shoulder the massive, suffocating pressure of being the center of the biggest musical act in human history. He was quite literally raised by his 6 older bandmates within the harsh, intensely scrutinized walls of tiny practice rooms and massive broadcasting stations, meaning that for Jungkook, the stage is not just a workplace, it is quite literally the only playground he has ever truly known, and his massive global audience is the only neighborhood he has ever played in.
When he aggressively sprints across that stadium, violently throwing his meticulously crafted rock star image out the window to act like a completely ridiculous, uncontrollably energetic child, he is engaging in a profound, deeply moving act of reclaiming the youth he so bravely sacrificed for the sake of his art and his deeply beloved army. It is a stunning, beautifully raw display of absolute, unconditional emotional safety, proving that despite the staggering, mind-bending wealth, the terrifying global fame, and the immense, heavy expectations placed squarely on his broad shoulders, he still feels completely, entirely safe enough to just let go and simply exist as the wild, free, and endless joyous little brother of the group. The fans inside the Allegiant Stadium that night didn't just witness a concert blooper, they witnessed a massive, highly emotional, and deeply beautiful catharsis, feeling a massive, overwhelming surge of fierce, protective love for the man who gives absolutely everything he has to the world, yet still miraculously manages to protect the pure, uncorrupted innocence of his inner child.